Part 2. The Transformation of Money into Capital. Chapter 4. The General Formula for Capital. The circulation of commodities is the starting point of capital. The production of commodities and their circulation in its developed form, namely trade, form the historic presuppositions under which capital arises. World trade and the world market date from the 16th century, and from then on the modern history of capital starts to unfold. If we disregard the material content of the circulation of commodities, i.e. the exchange of the various use values, and consider only the economic forms brought into being by this process, we find that its ultimate product is money. This ultimate product of commodity circulation is the first form of appearance of capital. Historically speaking, capital invariably first confronts landed property in the form of money, in the form of monetary wealth, merchant's capital, and usurer's capital. However, we do not need to look back at the history of capital's origins in order to recognize that money is its first form of appearance. Every day, the same story is played out before us. Even up to the present day, all new capital in the first instance steps onto the stage, i.e. the market, whether it's the commodity market, the labor market, or the money market, in the shape of money. Money which has to be transformed into capital by definite processes. The first distinction between money as money and money as capital is nothing more than a difference in their form of circulation. The direct form of circulation of commodities is CMC, the transformation of commodities into money and the reconversion of money into commodities, selling in order to buy. But alongside this form we find another form, which is quite distinct from the first, MCM, the transformation of money into commodities and the reconversion of commodities into money, buying in order to sell. Money which describes the latter course in its movement is transformed into capital, becomes capital, and from the point of view of its function, already is capital. Let us examine the circular movement MCM a little more closely. Just as in the case of simple circulation, it passes through two antithetical phases. In the first phase, M to C being the purchase, the money is changed into a commodity. In the second phase, C to M, the sale, the commodity is changed back again into money. These two phases, taken together in their unity, constitute the total movement which exchanges money for a commodity and the same commodity for money, which buys a commodity in order to sell it, or if one neglects the formal distinction between buying and selling, buys a commodity with money and then buys money with a commodity. The result, in which the whole process vanishes, is the exchange of money for money, M to M. If I purchase 2,000 pounds of cotton for 100 pounds sterling and resell the 2,000 pounds of cotton for 110 pounds, I have in fact exchanged 100 pounds for 110 pounds, money for money. Now it is evident that the circulatory process MCM would be absurd and empty if the intention were, by using this roundabout route, to exchange two equal sums of money, 100 pounds for 100 pounds. The miser's plan would be far simpler and surer. He holds on to his 100 pounds instead of exposing it to the dangers of circulation. And yet, whether the merchant who has paid 100 pounds for his cotton sells it for 110 pounds, or lets it go for 100 pounds or even 50 pounds, his money has at all events described a characteristic and original path, quite different in kind from the path of simple circulation, as for instance in the case of the peasant who sells corn and with the money thus set free buys clothes. First then, we have to characterize the formal distinctions between the two circular paths MCM and CMC. This will simultaneously provide us with the difference in content which lies behind these formal distinctions. Let us first see what the two forms have in common. Both paths can be divided into the same two antithetical phases, C to M being a sale and M to C being a purchase. In each phase, the same material elements confront each other, namely a commodity and money, and the same economic dramatis personae, a buyer and a seller. Each circular path is the unity of the same two antithetical phases, and in each case this unity is mediated through the emergence of three participants in a contract, of whom one only sells, another only buys, and the third both buys and sells. What, however, first and foremost distinguishes the two paths CMC and MCM from each other is the inverted order of succession of the two opposed phases of circulation. The simple circulation of commodities begins with a sale and ends with a purchase, while the circulation of money as capital begins with a purchase and ends with a sale. In the one case, both the starting point and the terminating point of the movement are commodities. In the other, they are money. The whole process is mediated in the first form by money and in the second inversely by a commodity. In the circulation CMC, the money is in the end converted into a commodity which serves as a use value. It has therefore been spent once and for all. In the inverted form MCM, on the contrary, the buyer lays out money in order that as a seller he may recover money, By the purchase of his commodity, he throws money into circulation in order to withdraw it again by the sale of the same commodity. He releases the money, but only with the cunning intention of getting it back again. The money, therefore, is not spent, it is merely advanced. In the form CMC, the same piece of money is displaced twice. The seller gets it from the buyer and pays it away to another seller. The whole process begins when money is received in return for commodities, and comes to an end when money is given up in return for commodities. In the form MCM, this process is inverted. Here, it is not the piece of money which is displaced twice, but the commodity. The buyer takes it from the hands of the seller and passes it into the hands of another buyer. Whilst in the simple circulation of commodities, the twofold displacement of the same piece of money effects its definitive transfer from one hand into another, here the twofold displacement of the same commodity causes the money to flow back to its initial point of departure. This reflux of money to its starting point does not depend on the commodities being sold for more than was paid for it. That only has a bearing on the amount of money which flows back. The phenomenon of reflux itself takes place as soon as the purchased commodity is resold, i.e. as soon as the cycle MCM has been completed. We have here, therefore, a palpable difference between the circulation of money as capital and its circulation as mere money. The cycle CMC reaches its conclusion when the money brought in by the sale of one commodity is withdrawn again by the purchase of another. If there follows a reflux of money to its starting point, this can happen only through a renewal or repetition of the whole course of the movement. If I sell a quarter of corn for £3, and with this £3 buy clothes, the money, so far as I'm concerned, is irreversibly spent. I have nothing more to do with it. It belongs to the clothes merchant. If I now sell a second quarter of corn, money indeed flows back to me, not, however, as a result of the first transaction, but of its repetition. The money again leaves me as soon as I complete the second transaction by a fresh purchase. In the cycle CMC, therefore, the expenditure of money has nothing to do with its reflux. In MCM, on the other hand, the reflux of the money is conditioned by the very manner in which it is expended. Without this reflux, the operation fails, or the process is interrupted and incomplete, owing to the absence of its complementary and final phase, the sale. The path CMC proceeds from the extreme constituted by one commodity and ends with the extreme constituted by another, which falls out of circulation and into consumption. Consumption, the satisfaction of needs, in short, use value, is therefore its final goal. The path MCM, however, proceeds from the extreme of money and finally returns to that same extreme. Its driving and motivating force, its determining purpose, is therefore exchange value. In the simple circulation of commodities, the two extremes have the same economic form. They are both commodities and commodities of equal value, but they are also qualitatively different use values, as for example corn and clothes. The exchange of products, the interchange carried out between the different materials in which social labor is embodied, forms here the content of the movement. It is otherwise in the cycle MCM. At first sight, this appears to lack any content, because it is tautological. Both extremes have the same economic form. They're both money, and therefore not qualitatively different use values, for money is precisely the converted form of commodities in which their particular use values have been extinguished. To exchange £100 for cotton, and then to exchange the same cotton again for £100 is merely a roundabout way of exchanging money for money, the same for the same, and appears to be an operation as purposeless as it is absurd. One sum of money is distinguishable from another only by its amount. The process MCM does not therefore owe its content to any qualitative difference between its extremes, for they are both money, but solely to the quantitative changes. More money is finally withdrawn from circulation than was thrown into it at the beginning. The cotton originally bought for £100 is, for example, resold at £100 plus £10. The complete form of this process is therefore M to C to M prime, where M prime is equal to M plus delta M, i.e. the original sum advance plus an increment. This increment, or excess over the original value, I call surplus value. The value originally advanced, therefore, not only remains intact while in circulation, but increases its magnitude, adds to itself a surplus value, or is valorized, and this movement converts it into capital. Of course, it is also possible that in C to M to C, the two extremes C and C, say corn and clothes, may represent quantitatively different magnitudes of value. The peasant may sell his corn above its value, or may buy clothes at less than their value. He may, on the other hand, be cheated by the clothes merchant. Yet for this particular form of circulation, such differences in value are purely accidental. The fact that the corn and the clothes are equivalents does not deprive the process of all sense and meaning, as it does in MCM. The equivalence of their values is rather a necessary condition of its normal course. The repetition or renewal of the act of selling in order to buy finds its measure and its goal, as does the process itself, in a final purpose which lies outside it, namely consumption, the satisfaction of definite needs. But in buying in order to sell, on the contrary, the end and the beginning are the same, money or exchange value, and this very fact makes the movement an endless one. Certainly, M becomes M plus delta M, £100 becomes £110, but considered qualitatively, £100 is the same as £110, namely money, while from the quantitative point of view, £110 is, like £100, a sum of definite and limited value. If the £110 is now spent as money, it ceases to play its part. It is no longer capital. Withdrawn from circulation, it is petrified into a hoard, and it could remain in that position until the last judgment without a single farthing accruing to it. If, then, we are concerned with the valorization of value, the value of the £110 has the same need for valorization as the value of the £100, for they are both limited expressions of exchange value, and therefore both have the same vocation, to approach, by quantitative increase, as near as possible to absolute wealth. Momentarily indeed, the value originally advanced, the £100, is distinguishable from the surplus value of £10, added to it during circulation, but the distinction vanishes immediately. At the end of the process, we do not receive on one hand the original £100 and on the other the surplus value of £10. What emerges is rather a value of 110, which is in exactly the same form, appropriate for commencing the valorization process as the original £100. At the end of the movement, money emerges once again as its starting point. Therefore, the final result of each separate cycle, in which a purchase and consequent sale are completed, forms of itself the starting point for a new cycle. The simple circulation of commodities, selling in order to buy, is a means to a final goal which lies outside circulation, namely the appropriation of use values, the satisfaction of needs. As against this, the circulation of money as capital is an end in itself, for the valorization of value takes place only within this constantly renewed movement. The movement of capital is therefore limitless. As the conscious bearer of this movement, the possessor of money becomes a capitalist. His person, or rather his pocket, is the point from which the money starts, and to which it returns. The objective content of the circulation we have been discussing, the valorization of value, is his subjective purpose, and it is only insofar as the appropriation of ever more wealth in the abstract is the sole driving force behind his operations that he functions as a capitalist, i.e. as capital personified and endowed with consciousness and a will. Use values must therefore never be treated as the immediate aim of the capitalist, nor must the profit on any single transaction. His aim is rather the unceasing movement of profit-making. This boundless drive for enrichment, this passionate chase after value, is common to the capitalist and the miser. But while the miser is merely a capitalist gone mad, the capitalist is a rational miser. The ceaseless augmentation of value, which the miser seeks to attain by saving his money from circulation, is achieved by the more acute capitalist by means of throwing his money again and again into circulation. The independent form, i.e. the monetary form, which the value of commodities assumes in simple circulation, does nothing but mediate the exchange of commodities, and it vanishes in the final result of the movement. On the other hand, in the circulation MCM, both the money and the commodity function only as different modes of existence of value itself. The money has its general mode of existence, the commodity has its particular, or so to speak, disguised mode. It is constantly changing from one form into the other, without becoming lost in this movement. It thus becomes transformed into an automatic subject. If we pin down the specific forms of appearance assumed in turn by self-valorizing value in the course of its life, we reach the following elucidation. Capital is money. Capital is commodities. In truth, however, value is here the subject of a process in which, while constantly assuming the form in turn of money and commodities, it changes its own magnitude, throws off surplus value from itself considered as original value, and thus valorizes itself independently. For the movement in the course of which it adds surplus value is its own movement, its valorization is therefore self-valorization. By virtue of being value, it has acquired the occult ability to add value to itself. It brings forth living offspring, or at least lays golden eggs. As the dominant subject of this process, in which it alternately assumes and loses the form of money and the form of commodities, but preserves and expands itself through all these changes, value requires, above all, an independent form by means of which its identity with itself may be asserted. Only in the shape of money does it possess this form. Money therefore forms the starting point and the conclusion of every valorization process. It was £100, and now it's £110, etc. But the money itself is only one of the two forms of value. Unless it takes the form of some commodity, it does not become capital. There is here no antagonism, as in the case of hoarding, between the money and commodities. The capitalist knows that all commodities, however tattered they may look or however badly they may smell, are in faith and in truth money, are by nature circumcised Jews, and what is more, a wonderful means for making still more money out of money. In simple circulation, the value of commodities attained at the most a form independent of their use values, i.e. the form of money. But now, in the circulation MCM, value suddenly presents itself as a self-moving substance which passes through a process of its own, and for which commodities and money are both mere forms. But there is more to come. Instead of simply representing the relations of commodities, it now enters into a private relationship with itself, as it were. It differentiates itself as original value from itself as surplus value, just as God the Father differentiates himself from himself as God the Son, although both are of the same age and form, in fact, one single person. For only by the surplus value of £10 does the £100 originally advanced become capital, and as soon as this has happened, as soon as the Son has been created and through the Son, the Father, their difference vanishes again, and both become one, £110. Value therefore now becomes value in process, money in process, and as such, capital. It comes out of circulation, enters into it again, preserves and multiplies itself within circulation, emerges from it with an increased size, and starts the same cycle again and again. M to M, money which begets money. Such is the description of capital given by its first interpreters, the mercantilists. Buying in order to sell, or more accurately, buying in order to sell dearer, MCM, seems admittedly to be a form peculiar to one kind of capital alone, merchant's capital. But industrial capital, too, is money which has been changed into commodities and reconverted into more money by the sale of these commodities. Events which take place outside the sphere of circulation, in the interval between buying and selling, do not affect the form of this movement. Lastly, in the case of interest-bearing capital, the circulation MCM prime presents itself in abridged form, in its final result and without any intermediate stage, in a concise style, so to speak, as M to M prime, i.e. money which is worth more money, value which is greater than itself. M to C to M prime is in fact, therefore, the general formula for capital, in the form in which it appears directly in the sphere of circulation.